to build a product, to build a company that serves that unique and growing demographic. And I got excited, about the prospect of building something that is mine. And frankly, I got excited about building something that aligns with, this ethos that I've ignored for so long, which is, my own creativity.
Today's guest is my friend Manny Alvarez, a public servant, former general counsel and chief compliance officer of Affirm, a fintech founder, and father rewriting what leadership looks like. As California's top banking regulator, serving as the first Senate-confirmed commissioner of the Department of Financial Protection and Innovation, he faced impossible decisions under pressure during COVID. Later, he left politics behind to launch Manifest Financial and returned to his creative roots through writing. We discuss what government work taught him about empathy, how raising two sons helped him rethink everything he thought he knew about masculinity, and why creative expression is just as vital as professional success. Manny's story is a study in showing up, staying humble, and building what really matters. Let's start the show. Manny, welcome.
Thank you. Appreciate it.
It's great to see you, man. I want to talk about a lot of things. You wear a lot of different hats over the course of your career. And you bear with me because I'm going to look off to the sides. I've got some notes too, but co-founder, principal, chief compliance officer. I want to talk about Affirm, some of the time that you had at Affirm, taking it public. You were there when it went public, right?
No. I had already left, but
okay. So preceding that, even more so.
Yeah.
And then a lot of stuff that you've done for the government, including, and let's not forget white shoe law firm experience, but California Chief Banking and Financial Regulator as a commission of Department of Financial Protection and Innovation. And you worked at the CFPB in DC as well. So there's a through line that I see sort of in all of your experience, which is maybe a dual pursuit between advocacy. That certainly is the through line, but there's a little bit of purpose-driven pursuits in maybe the public sector and certainly capitalistic private pursuits. And not a lot of people get to experience both of those, but I want to just kick things off because it's timely. I mentioned it before, and we can take that. But from your perspective, and I know you've got a unique background as it relates to, I think, a lot of the listeners, there have been a lot of raids, ICE raids in Los Angeles, in farming communities. There was one in MacArthur Park, which was really dystopian in its imagery. And I know I'm starting on sort of a lightning rod here, but I want to just hear your take and just maybe if you can prime the audience with a little bit of your background so we can get a context here.
Sure. Dystopian is a good word. So look, I'll contextualize a little bit of my perspective here. I have been in and out of government throughout my career, in different capacities. When I was the times that I served in government in a non-political appointee role as a government lawyer with the AG's office, and then as a lawyer with the CFPB. Those were probably some of the happiest times of my life as a practicing lawyer. I really enjoyed my time in government as a lawyer because I was able to marry up a mission that was bigger than me with opportunities to take on a lot of primary responsibility. And then I've also had the experience of serving as a political appointee. And what I would say is my experience as a political appointee was fulfilling in other ways. It was also starkly different from my experience as a non-political appointee, because what I didn't realize as a political appointee was that I was at that point working in politics. It was no longer, I thought it was going to be this kind of pure pursuit of, calling balls and strikes. And it just wasn't the case. I obviously had an opportunity so I was commissioner of banks. And I certainly had the influence, the ear of people around me, above me, and also the opportunity to influence outcomes. But it wasn't it wasn't free from politics, and that was very surprising to me.
Clarify what that means.
So what I mean is, on any issue, on any policy issue, right, about banking. So, for example, let's take something fairly novel. In California, we have signed into law the idea of public banks, right? It is now possible for a city, municipality, or whatever, for a public entity in the state of California to establish a public bank. It is a very novel idea, with virtually no example except for this kind of unique thing in North Dakota. That there are two of those laws. They've been on the books now for a couple of years. Nobody has been able to take advantage. Nobody has taken advantage of those laws, right? And so this is just an example, right? These are laws that were signed that are effectively feckless. They're not actually. It is not feasible for anybody to actually leverage these. And so then the question becomes, why did they pass? And the answer, in my view, became because of external political pressures, right? Like, you had a bunch of different political actors within an arena that had to deliver a win to their respective constituents, right? And so this is what I saw time and time again. And I don't mean I'm trying to be very very normative about this. I don't necessarily think it's good. I don't necessarily think it's bad. It is, right? This is just how it operates. And sometimes it works really well, right? The political pressures create something that's really useful to a lot of different people. And a lot of times it doesn't result in that, right? And so I say all that to contextualize my views, which is, I last left government, I think, with a lot of, unfortunately, a lot of skepticism. And because what I saw were all of these, I saw this intense pressure to cater, sometimes pander to extreme opinions within our political spectrum, right? Fortunately, this is kind of where we have come to now. Is we have to. I think the majority of the country is kind of right here, right? We just want to provide for our families and kind of do good work and all that. But from like a political perspective, we are constantly forced to serve the opinions, the perspectives of more extreme beliefs. And that, unfortunately, is, I think, so what do I think of the ICE raids? I think it's atrocious. I think it's abysmal. I think it is a horrible, act of humanity. And I think it is, I think it ignores a lot of political history. I think it ignores a lot of history of labor needs, particularly in Southern California. And I just, honestly, the best way I can cope with it these days, unfortunately, is, it's like to focus on my own family and my kids. It's too overwhelming. I think if we, it's almost too overwhelming to look at it for too long. So my background, both of my parents met in Southern California. Both were immigrants from Mexico. I grew up with my mother. She became a naturalized citizen when I was in junior high. My perspective growing up was that, certainly in the kind of mid to late 80s, immigration, we didn't really talk about immigration the same way we do today, right? Back then it felt a lot more fluid, right? Because the reality is, there were certain labor needs that that immigrants and migrant farm workers filled, right? And then over time, immigration it always becomes a political issue. And the question just because, how do we talk about it, right? What do we want to, what reaction do we want to elicit? And that drives how we talk about it, right? So I can recall, I think it was when Pete Wilson was campaigning for governor here in the state of California, his political commercials featured aerial footage of people running across the desert or the Mexican border in Tijuana, right? And of course that's going to antagonize a lot of people, right? You look at that image and you think, oh, that's an abomination. And what you don't realize though is, well, wait a minute, for the past 4 or 8 years, maybe it's been totally fine, right? It's been totally fine. What jobs are they actually taking, right? That you or I would want to do, right? The jobs that they're taking in Southern California tend to be agricultural, right? And so you talk to landowners, right? Farm owners, they actually rely on these sources of labor. So immigration's the ICE raids is really hard for me to watch because the immigration debate over the course of my life has been difficult for me to participate in because of my personal kind of history and perspective on it.
Well, and I appreciate you sharing all that, because I do, my grandparents immigrated here, and my grandfather provided the best life he could for his family. He was a mechanical repairman. He was doing manual labor. And I think that frames things in a different way than I think some of the headline news, which is why I want to get your perspective, but yours in particular, where you have an insider knowledge about how the government sort of works. And I don't want to put words into your mouth, but I appreciate you sharing maybe the disillusion that you had relative to being in government versus being in politics. And this wasn't the direction I was originally thinking of going, but as you bring it up, it sounds like, technology plays a role in some of this, because to some degree, it seems like politicians are not just serving the majority of their constituents. In fact, I would argue that in many cases, that is not who they're serving. They're more primarily focused on maybe the algorithm. What's going to get the greatest clicks, what's going to get the greatest flash, which is why I think these raids are a topic of consideration for me, because the imagery themselves are so drastic in comparison to what might be necessary, so to speak. And I'm wondering how you reconcile your participation in advocacy when you've been on the inside and you've seen how the sausage is made. You've been on the outside. You've also been an advocate within the AG's office. You've been an advocate at a white shoe law firm. How do you approach, I guess, maybe the best way to ask it would be, how do you advise your own children, right, as they age, as a dad with this experience? How do you advise advocacy within their own realm?
It's interesting. I don't know. I don't know that I have ever thought of, I probably don't think about advocacy as much as I should. I don't know that I think about my responsibilities as a dad in advocacy terms, although I probably should. I think, I guess I'll start with this anecdote because I think this is an experience that really helped instill a lot of the personal and professional philosophies I still hold to this day. And again, it's related to financial services, right? So when I was a baby lawyer practicing in a white shoe law firm, I was for the most part miserable, right? I was doing it primarily out of necessity. But I very much had this interest in public service for a lot of different reasons. So the first opportunity that I had within public service was with the AG's office, and it was with what is called the consumer law section. And initially, when I was exploring the opportunity and I interviewed with that section, I interviewed because, again, I was looking for alternatives out of the law firm environment. But I was pretty skeptical initially. I thought to myself, consumer protection, consumer law, what is this? Are we like enforcing weights and measures requirements? Like, what is this? And what I realized in going through that process and interviewing the lawyers that were working in the section at the time, I realized, holy shit, these are civil litigators that are using civil laws as their weapon to essentially enforce civil rights. And the particular civil rights, were kind of economic in nature, right? A lot of the investigations, a lot of the cases were the result of acts and practices that led to a lot of financial pain across the board, right? So the easiest kind of examples that we can talk about, going back to the great financial crisis, 2010, you had all of this disruption in the mortgage markets for a lot of different reasons, right? So many things went haywire. And, we can talk about all the different causes, and there were many. We can talk about all the different causes another time. But the net result, and my observation was, you know what? It's really important to make sure that as like a society, there's a common denominator. There's like a base level expectation that we should insist on, because, right? One, because it's the right thing to do, but two, if we don't have that, it actually really hurts other people, right? Like I don't have a mortgage, and I am suffering. I'm still suffering as a result of, as a participant, as a member of society, I am suffering because of acts and practices that happened over here in this other part of the ecosystem. So I guess bringing it back to advocacy, maybe the perspective I developed then was, it's important. It is important to advocate for kind of baseline expectations, baseline realities, because we're all, whether we like it or not, right? We're all kind of interconnected. And so maybe that's, I don't know if I've gotten to that point in my journey as a father, right? Like right now it's still very much like, brush your teeth and, do good work kind of thing. But I think that's the enduring lesson, right? That is worth passing on, right? Like at some point it's important for us to look beyond our individual privilege, because we're all participants in this like same, system, right? Whether we like it or not.
That's interesting to me, because I think I hadn't really thought about advocacy much until I had a kid, and it's way too early to try and impart any wisdom for me at this point to him. But, seeing that connectivity is something that resonates with me in a way that it never had, simply because you do see that, right? You do see how connected we are. I mean, a common thing I talk about is like, I've had people say like, "Hey, brother." And, when I say, "Hey, brother," they're like, "I'm not your brother. Don't call me brother." And it's like, oh, okay, I get it. But the reality is like that sort of resonated differently after I had a kid, because you start to realize this interconnectedness in a way that, okay, there's these other children in the class. You want them to be happy people, and because you want them to be good to your own child. And in order for those children to be happy, you want those parents to be in a good place and to be caring about their world. And as a result, I find myself caring about those parents. But if you extrapolate that into the greater civilized world, that applies to the Amazon delivery person, that applies to even the politician that you don't agree with. And in that way, I think it is really material that we start to take, I'm speaking of myself as a family, to take more consideration in how we get involved. But I don't know the right answer to that, which is why I was sort of asking you. But I'll transition this a little bit, unless you have something else you want to add on that topic.
The one thing you the one idea that that sparks with me is the idea of modeling behavior, modeling the behavior I want to see in my child, which is more than anything, becoming a father, I think is really what pushes me beyond my comfort zone, right? Like more than anything else. And there are the stupid examples. Like the dumbest example is skiing. I hate snow. I hate snow so much, right? It's like stupid. It's cold. Like I don't want to get dressed up for it. But if I've learned to ski poorly, but I've learned to ski. Why? Because my boys have learned to ski, and they ski with their cousins, and they're really good now, especially compared, like I can barely keep up. I can't keep up. And as much as I hate snow and everything that's involved, like I do it because I at least want to give them the opportunity to choose for themselves whether this is something that gives them joy, right? Like just because I'm like a curmudgeon doesn't mean I want to impart that.
Right.
Like it's choice. For me, it's choice, right? Like you have the choice to decide whether this is something that you enjoy or not. But I don't want to influence that. I don't want to be the governor on that. And I think about that also in like, in terms of like human interactions. I think about it a lot with how we interact with the parents, right? Like my 10-year-old, as an example, my 10-year-old, he's a really cool kid. He's a really anxious kid, and he's a really shy kid. And it's painful for me to see because that's exactly how I was. And I like I want to wave a magic wand and make all that go away from him, but I know that's not possible. So, what my wife and I talk about, what I tell her is, hey, I think we really have to model good behavior for them in terms of how we socialize with, not just within the family, but like with other people, right? And so I try to make it a point. We try to make it a point of socializing with the parents in our cohort, right? And we invite people over and socialize with them because I do want the kids to see, hey, this is how you socialize. No need to be afraid. And, there are benefits to be derived from it. And I say, I come back to where I started, like it pushes me outside my comfort zone. I fucking hate people.
Yeah. But, even that to some degree, I think that shyness probably lent itself to you being a more voracious reader, a hyper communicator, probably tickled a little bit of your creative side as well. So, those pain points, I think, can also be the source of real power. It's just, I guess, a matter of harnessing it. But as it relates to fear, just because I'm looking at your hat that says surf boy, and I know that you were a surfer, and I read somewhere that you're deathly afraid of sharks now. Have you gotten your boys in the water?
Yeah, actually. So for the last, I don't know, 3 years, we actually will head down to Southern California for the second half of summer and spend a couple of weeks in Oxnard, where I grew up. And so, we'll leave next week. And yeah, I've got them in the water. They did surf camp last year. And it's cool. They like boogie boarding. So like we'll be down there, and the three of us will get in the water and go boogie boarding together. That's a lot of fun.
All right. I want to switch gears here. So I want to hear more about the commissioner, the Senate confirmation of becoming the commissioner of Department of Financial Protection and Innovation, mostly because I know that it ended up modeling within California, ended up serving as a model for the nation as a whole in many regards. But I think we're sort of at the tip of the spear in this area, just as it relates to certainly AI, as everybody's talking about it. How banking's changing? What have you witnessed? You've served on boards. You've been in banking for many, many years. I'm just curious, first of all, what was the process like getting confirmed? Did you have to lobby yourself in any capacity? What was that on-ramp? And then what was your life like being in that role? And were you in charge of constructing the legislation or enforcing it, advising on it? For those who are not involved in that realm, I'm just curious what we don't know.
Sure. So I'll start a little before the confirmation process because there is advocacy involved, but more of the advocacy is actually involved on the front end. And this is very, this is certainly more inside baseball. There is more advocacy involved in getting the appointment from the governor's office. So procedurally, the way it works is governor appoints political appointees. The California Senate then has a year to confirm the appointment, and then at that point you go on your merry way. The process of getting appointed is that's a little bit like a whisper campaign, right? Because first of all, you have to get the attention of the governor's appointments secretary and people in the Capitol.
But in some ways, you have to be a little bit shoulder tapped, right?
Yeah. And that comes from, but in my case, the way it worked, and I still can't decide if this was was this a practical joke or truly something positive. So, before I got appointed, right, I was general counsel of Affirm, so I was very much mired in the fintech ecosystem, and this is back when fintech was still kind of it was still pretty nascent, and there was a community of other lawyers, ledge affairs people, general counsel. We all start to get to know each other. I think, right? I suspect what happened is some people that I knew probably started to mention my name because I had both government experience and I was someone that they knew and liked enough, or maybe they didn't like me and that's why they mentioned my name. I have no idea. But that's sort of how in my case, how the shoulder tap happened, right? I get a call, from someone, and it's sort of like, hey, your name has been passed around and for this appointment. Is this something that you might be interested in exploring? Right. It's very much like, we might like you, but
right.
You gotta tell us if you like us first.
And what's your reaction at this point? I mean, are you sitting in your office? Are you blindsided by this information? Is it an email?
It was, I think I called back, right? I think it was like a voicemail, because I generally don't pick up my phone, but it was I'm sure it was a voicemail, and I look at the caller ID and it says state of California. I was like, what? Do I owe taxes? So I'm sure, I was responding to a voicemail that I got. And my reaction was, initially it's sort of like, what? And then, it's sort of cool. But you go through this whole process, what is this about? It's kind of cool. It's a little scary, more than a little scary. So you go down the process, right? You go through the process, and you talk to a bunch of people. There are a bunch of interviews, right? Why is this something you might want to do? What do you think? What do you think you could bring to the role, et cetera, et cetera?
Is this among staff members within the governor's office, or is it among politicians within the state assembly?
So at this point, it's primarily staff members,
okay,
and advisors, right? Sort of cabinet level. Yep. Well, yeah, cabinet level and above. And politicians politicians did not get involved with me at this point. And
who was governor at the time? Sorry to interrupt.
This is Newsom. So this was shortly after Newsom got elected, for sure, right?
Yep.
And that's why that's how these things tend to happen, right? These appointments tend to coincide with new administration. And then as that is happening, right, I surrounded myself obviously with friends and advisors, just so I can ask questions like, hey, is this a good idea? And one, is it a good idea? Two, how do I do this? How do I go through this process sensibly without making a fool of myself? And as it turns out, right, everyone actually wants to be very helpful, because everyone recognizes it, hey, if I can help you out,
sure,
maybe you'll remember that I helped you out, right?
Sure.
And so it all begins. And so in going through that, you gotta, you figure out how do I get support? Actually, now that I think about it, I did have an early conversation with a politician who was at the time part of leadership for the California the Democratic Latino Caucus, which is in California, not surprisingly, maybe one of the largest, I think the largest Democratic caucus in the state, right? And so it's a caucus that if you're a governor, you have to listen to this caucus. And so I had a conversation with her. It was a fairly brief conversation. She says, "Look, I've seen your resume. I really only have two questions. One, are you actually a Democrat?" And at the time I was. I'm no longer registered. I'm now no party preference. But at the time I was kind of, lifelong straight ticket Democrat. Again, that was then.
Yeah.
And I said, of course, and then I don't even know if I should share the second question, but it was essentially like, are you down? Right.
Yeah.
In other words, right? Like,
yeah.
Are you down? And so we had that conversation, and she goes, "Okay, look, of course we're going to write a letter for you. Like, we never get candidates with financial experience. We usually get candidates for, like, I don't know, like social services or education, like, of course." So that was nice. Right. And it was also a big part of the reason why I felt like, oh my God, I think I actually have to do this if I get it, because, because it's, representation or whatever matters. So again, that's where most of the politicking for me happened once I was appointed and I start. So you get appointed and you start, and then you have that year to go through, I started the job.
Yeah.
But then you also have to like spend the next year meeting with members of the relevant committee, the banking committee, and they want to interview you, get to know you, and blah blah blah. So there's a lot of that, just like get to know you. Let's make sure you're not insane, kind of thing.
Are you working at the time still at a firm at this point?
No, at this point, I am a full-time government employee. I'm collecting I am commissioner.
Okay, you are commissioner, just not appointed yet. Confirmed rather.
Not yet confirmed.
Right. And are these lunches? Are they you going out for drinks? Are they breakfast? Are they Zoom calls? Are they what is this like?
This is
going into their offices.
Yes. Yeah. This is like, come into my office Tuesday at 3:45, and it's like meet with me and my staffer.
Yeah.
There's always someone else. There's always someone else in the room, right?
Yeah.
And so that's kind of how it goes. You have these series of meetings. So by the time you actually get to the confirmation hearing itself, it's all been done. They've already asked you all the questions. They already know who you are. They already know how they're going to vote. The confirmation hearing itself, it's like ceremonial, right? Like, it was kind of cool. You get people, friends and family show up. You get people testifying on your behalf just to be on record. Like, yes, he is not insane, at least not visibly so. And that's kind of how it goes. And then they vote right there and then.
What's your experience? What's your takeaway from working with politicians, being in a government role in that high of a level, trying to get your own initiatives passed? What setbacks do you have? What challenges do you have in terms of, and I'll just sort of use one example as sort of where I'm going with this, but the Senate hearings where Mark Zuckerberg was talking to the panel about, what's going on within his world. And some of those questions were so far removed from their reality. They clearly had no sense of what Facebook or Meta did. And I'm just curious, there has to be some overlap in your world, because people like to purport that they know what's going on in the finance industry, but fintech is moving fast, and it's very different now than it was even 2 years ago.
Yes. So again, my experience was that conversations for the most part, conversations behind closed doors were very different from conversations that happen, in a hearing setting. And I don't, again, I don't mean to say that it's good or bad. It just is, right? And I would say in the best case, the elected that who I was meeting with would sort of prepare me, right? Like, hey, here's like, I want to hear your perspective about the following, just so that you're not caught off guard. Here are the things that I'm going to ask in the formal setting. Here's what I expect to hear from you. So in the best case, they would prep you like, hey, here's actually the exchange that I'm looking for, so that I can be on record, so that I can establish, so I can make this point to my colleague down the road or whatever, right? It's in the best case, it's that kind of fluid give and take. In the worst case, they totally just sandbag you, right? And there were only a few of those experiences where I meet with someone behind closed doors, and it's like, yeah, I think we have a good conversation. Cool. I think we're going to be good going into this next hearing. And then just, you get totally sandbagged because they're looking for the headline, right? Like, so-and-so grills Commissioner Alvarez about blah, blah, blah. So that was my experience. Like, for the most part, it was positive. I don't mean to be pejorative about it. It was for the most part very, very cool. And I have the utmost respect for elected officials for being willing to, go through the political, like, it is not an easy process. It's not easy living on your life in public view, which is effectively what you do. And it's all public service. But yeah, it's very much, there can be a lot of gamesmanship involved.
What was your process for determining that it was time for you to resign?
Got out of COVID. So I started in the role several months before COVID, and I was really enjoying it. Right. It was a privilege leading a department it was close to 800 employees. Right. You have a sizable annual budget. I think it was like north of $100 million annual budget. Like, there's a lot to do, right? You are effectively the chief executive of this organization, and I really enjoyed that sort of the process of managing an executive team and building out new functions, and you get to meet a lot. I mean, talk about top of funnel, right? Like, you get invited to like speak to XYZ group. And that was all very, very cool. Then COVID happens and shuts down. And all of a sudden the job becomes, 12 hours behind, 12 hours in your office trying to solve like impossible problems. And that was just so utterly draining.
Can you give us an example of that?
Sure. So I'm sitting here and, it's probably like a Tuesday morning and I get a call. Someone, deputy cabinet, something or other. Hey, the COVID numbers are, this is early days. The economic numbers are looking really, really bleak. And we need you to help us figure out how to pause all mortgage payments and rent payments across the state for an indefinite period of time. And I go, what? Like, I don't even know how to do that.
Yeah.
Right. And so that was a whole, like,
pause it in terms of a legislative action, or an executive order of some sort. Yeah.
Or how about this? It was open-ended. They were like, we don't know. Right. Like,
yeah,
we need executive action. Right. But like, what do we do? How do we do it? And it's like a mortgage moratorium for an indefinite. Now, like, what do you do? Right. We're going through 100-year, like a very, very strange point in history, right? And so, obviously I understand, you understand the reality, right? Like, yes, it would be good to tell everyone in the state, like, hey, you're not going to work, so you don't have to worry about making your mortgage payment for a time. But also, like, how do you even accomplish that? I have no idea. So, we went through a process and I am, it's incredible to think about what we were actually able to accomplish. I think it's something, in the end, I'm like very proud of what we were able to accomplish. But it was that kind of thing, right? Just like time and time again. It was just that kind of impossible task over and over and over again through COVID. And so by the time to be honest, I intended to stay in that role for as long as they would have me, because because it's kind of cool. But I was just so damn tired by the end of it, and again, jaded by the end of it. So I just decided, you know what, it's the kind of like, I may not be an important person, but this is an important job, and it deserves someone who is going to be just 100% committed to the mission. And right now, like, I just felt so fried that I couldn't in good conscience keep doing it.
What do you see in your crystal ball as it relates to banking and regulation with the likes of blockchain and other similar types of economic transactions?
I think, for better or worse, I think that market trends are, for the most part, irresistible. Like, it's almost like gravity, right? And so we're going to, we will always maybe go through these, we will always go through this kind of reactionary exercise where we go, oh my gosh, what is this new technology? It looks awful, must be bad. We have to figure out how to like put it back in the box kind of thing. But how do you? You don't, right? And so really what I see, what I think has happened and will probably continue to happen is, as new technologies emerge, you're always going to have kind of regulatory and policy responses to it that, that may or may not be calculated to do anything, right? Sometimes they're effective, sometimes they're not, but it's always a little bit of a catch-up game, right? And I unfortunately, for better or for worse, that's how I see banking and financial services continuing to evolve. The truths that we know. So we know that banks continue to disappear at an increasing rate, right? Years ago, there were 6,000 banks across the country. Now, I don't know what that number is, right? But it's like well below that, 5,500.
Well, there was a huge consolidation, right, in post 2008. That was probably the majority of it. And then there was another one in the last few years, like coming out of, Silicon Valley Bank sort of being an example of that type of thing continuing to happen, where they just get swallowed up. I don't mean to interrupt you, but where do you see that going?
Yeah, I know. I continue. I think that trend, I think it is an irreversible trend, unfortunately, because consolidation has always been part of the business of banking. You've always had these waves of consolidation. It's almost it is part of the business model, right? You have an investor group that stands up a new bank. It accretes deposits. It gets large enough to become an attractive target for the larger institution, and on the cycle would go. But what that required was new institutions continuing to emerge. And part of two things that are happening is, I think the consolidation will happen at a faster clip, and you don't have nearly the number of new institutions that are being created, right? So the trend line, talk to any investment banker in the banking space and they'll tell you the same thing, right? Like, you just project this out and you could see what's going to happen. Today in California, what do you have? 200, let's call it 200 banks in the state of California. Like, that's going to go down to like 75 in a matter of a decade, right? And what happens is just the larger institutions get larger. Again, maybe it's bad, maybe it's good, I don't know. It just is. And so, my view is that's really where I think technology can help take the place of that kind of proliferation of smaller institutions, right? So the idea is, hey, if we're not going to make more new banks, we can at least diversify the distribution models, right? And so you build new products, you build new distribution points that bolt onto the existing banking framework.
Well, and that's sort of where the likes of Affirm or Manifest come around. I sort of liken that to Shopify to Amazon. You're not going to beat Amazon, but you're becoming a disintermediary by serving the behemoth to some degree. Is
Mm-hmm.
that a fair analogy?
I think that's right. Yeah, I think that's right.
I want to transition to Affirm because you had mentioned, Max Levchin, who's the founder of, correct me if I'm wrong, founder of Affirm, but was the co-founder of PayPal as well. Was one of the large reasons you came over. I'm before you start talking about your experience within Affirm, although I can't imagine you having any description of Affirm without mentioning Max. What was it like working with a visionary like that? I mean, what sort of takeaways do you have that you are now instituting in your own entrepreneurial endeavors?
I mean, um, it's hard to overstate his. It's hard to overstate his leadership ability, right? And I'm saying separate and aside from his technical ability and kind of product acumen, like all of that is true. But I think in addition to that, what I was incredibly like pleasantly and incredibly surprised by was his um his executive leadership, right? Like he very much understands how to build teams, how to manage teams. And maybe I shouldn't have been so surprised, right? I mean, the guy is wildly successful. Um but I guess it is, right? Like you read the headlines about figures in technology, and you just kind of assume to yourself, like, oh my gosh, they must be like, they're brilliant, obviously, but maybe they're reclusive, or maybe they're this, that, and the other. But as it turns out, he is just, I mean, he is a very effective executive, who knows how to, he exhibits incredible patience. I don't think I ever saw him lose his temper, right? He was incredibly restrained. And I would say more than anything else, that's probably what I try to emulate and fail. But like that kind of restraint, right? Where he's not, he's frustrated, but he's just staying so calm under pressure. It's really impressive.
So I want to dig into that, but it's funny because in research for this, I actually came across an interview where he was talking about effectively the benefits of firing somebody, and he made this analogy where if you hear someone speaking and you're wondering if they're going to be here a year from now, you should fire them right then and there because you know the answer, and that's different than wanting to punch somebody in their face because that person, if you're not wondering whether they're going to be here next year, that's a very different reaction. But the way he described it was so matter of fact, practical, and also insightful. I think that streamlined, curtailed explanation articulates a lot of how he thinks. But where else do you see that? You see it. You see his leadership in his communication style, in how he's building a culture, in his inclusivity within the community. Is it seeking out opinions of those who are stakeholders or contributors? What are those takeaways that you are now, taking as a founder yourself into account?
Yeah, so I think, keeping in mind when I worked with them. So I left a firm 18 months, 18 to 24 months before the IPO. So I was, call it the early 5 years.
Yeah.
And so, I was the 31st employee, and when I left, we were like 800 employees. So it was that part of the journey.
Where you were wearing a lot of hats, right? I mean, you were general counsel, chief compliance officer, corporate secretary, and I'm assuming there's a lot of stuff that falls in between there that you're having to do as well.
Yeah, I mean, to be honest, in those days, the titles were like suggestions, right?
Right.
Like we all,
right.
everyone had to pick up a broom and like do something, right? And so I guess, yeah. Look, first, I would say in terms of culture building, he was I would say he was very good. He was very good about building, I think, an entrepreneurial and intellectually curious culture, right? I mean, you know, we hired we hired some like fiercely smart people, right? Engineers, like Stanford dropouts kind of thing, right? Like who were not afraid, to push back, right? Like not afraid to ask questions, not afraid to push back. And I think that's really healthy, right? Because I think it establishes the tone, right? Like, he's very much someone like at that point he already had the success under his belt to rule by decree, right? To lead by fiat, right? And you do that when necessary, but for the most part, you hire very capable people, and you give them an objective, and like you expect them to take you there, right? Like you enable them to do, you enable them, right? And I think also there was this element of humility, right? Uh, there would be, there were times I remember where it was very important for him to be visible and accessible. And so he would just make it a point, right? He would tell the entire company, he says, hey, like every Thursday I will be sitting in the kitchen from like, 10 to 5. So, I'll be working, but you should feel free to just like come talk to me if you want to. Which I'm sure is a pain in the ass, right? Like as a founder, you have like an infinite number of things to do, but it was just so important for him to establish that kind of culture, right? Like I'm someone that you can come and talk to and touch. I mean, look, I remember interviewing with him the very first time I met with him, and I interviewed with him, and we have a long conversation. He asks me, if I have any questions for him. And the one question I remember asking him was, why are you doing this? I assume you never have to work again. Why are you doing this? And he was just like, because this is like building is very gratifying to me, and it's very fun for me, right? And it's like, it's very nice. That's a nice kind of humility to encounter. I don't know. It's just I could go on and on and on. I really appreciate him. I consider him a friend to this day. I try to make a point of like, seeing him for coffee when I'm in San Francisco. I think the world of him.
Well, I want to use that as a springboard on a couple different fronts: intellectual curiosity, and actual creation, right? I mean, building something, because I think you've alluded to that. But before I jump onto that topic, I want to ask one last question as it relates to going from 30 to 800. What were some of those trigger points where, and I'll just give you some context of where I'm coming from. Marty Wiener, who was the founding engineer at Pinterest and was CTO at Reddit before they went public, was on this podcast, and he talked about how there was a number, I forget exactly what he said, but maybe it was around 60, where once you get to a certain threshold, you have to break down the systems, build a new one. And then it sort of happened in iterations. And I'm curious if you found anything similar to that and what your takeaway as those scaling trigger points occurred.
Yeah. So let's see. Numerically, I would say there's kind of the numerical point, and then the cultural points.
And those are intertwined to a large degree, I would imagine, right?
That's probably true. Yeah. So like the numerical point I can recall was like probably 75 or 80 employees, and the cultural way in which that breakpoint emerged for me was when I no longer knew the name of every employee at the company. When you see a face and you're like, oh my God, who the hell are you? Right? That's when you know, like, oh man, this is no longer, This is no longer that like, merry band of employees that were just like running fast and, trying to build things as fast as possible. It's something different. And then it happened again. And I don't know, I'm not going to recall the number, but let's say it was probably double that, right? So we're like in the 120s, 150s. The look and the apparel of the average employee changes, right? The show Silicon Valley is actually pretty spot on, in my opinion, with this observation. So this is my personal anecdote, which reveals this. So when I start working at a firm, right, again, I'm like the 31st employee or something like that, and I'm coming straight out of government, so I'm wearing what do I have, like business casual, right? So I'm wearing like suits and slacks and collared shirts. And I think my first or second day, my colleague Huey, who was the COO, she says, "Manny, what are you doing? Stop wearing those suits. You're scaring the children," right? And I thought she was joking, but she wasn't, because like 2 or 3 days later, she pulls me into a conference room. She's like, "Manny, you got to stop wearing those suits. You're making people around you nervous. Can you wear just like a t-shirt and jeans?" So I was like, "Oh, sure, I could do that. All right, I'll get real sloppy for you." So, I go into like t-shirt and jeans mode, right? For a while. And then 150 employees or so, what starts to happen is, at this point, we've like really done a good job of like building a product, established product market fit. Now we got to go out and scale the thing. So what do? You invest heavily in a sales function and a revenue function, which means that you're hiring more of like the Stanford GSBs, right? And like there's this level of polish in the employee that shows up, where they're wearing, their fitted shirts, right? And their fitted slacks. And I'm still in t-shirt and jeans. So I go, hang on a second, right? So I try to go back to my business casual wardrobe, and I don't fit in it anymore because that means. So I was like, damn you people. But like those two early, markers were significant. And then the last one I'll identify, because I I remember this pretty vividly. Like in the early days, right? In the early days, I'd go to recruiting functions, right? I accompany members of the team. We go to recruiting functions or anywhere else. You're talking to someone. What do you do? I work at a firm. Oh, which one? No. I work at a company called Affirm. And we went through that like Laurel, that Abbott and Costello routine for, I don't know, the first like 3.5 years I was there. And then at one point it stops, where you say like, I work at a firm, and people go, "Oh yeah, Peloton." Like it switches over, and all of a sudden people like have seen you, and like families like, "I've seen this." And I don't know like where we were in terms of employee count, but it was more like the partnership, right? It was like Casper, it was Peloton. But like once you got to those marquee partnerships, that was another kind of pivotal moment from the time that I was there.
So let's use that as a springboard to your building, your creativity, and building a new entity. I'll leave you with that to sort of take in whatever direction you want. And then we'll bring this to a close. I want to touch on something I was researching relative to dead or living who you'd want to have dinner with, and I want to talk about Anthony Bourdain before we close out this call. But I want you to talk about Manifest. I want to talk about you've always been an extraordinary writer for the 20 years I've known you, and a creative one at that. And so I'm just curious, what are you doing now, and how did Manifest come together? And those could be two separate points of contact, or you can intertwine them however you choose.
So yeah, they sort of align, right? They kind of collided. So I mentioned some of the difficult days I experienced when I was still commissioner, during the COVID days. And it was a difficult time, obviously, for the entire world. And I, like everyone else, was looking for ways to cope, right? And so, I would try to stay fit. I picked up, working on cars as like a hobby, but then I also like, I used it as an opportunity to go back to, what you mentioned, a thing I've always loved, which is writing. And it's something I've always loved. And frankly, I've always been afraid of doing more seriously because I think, I mean, it's probably something that every writer like struggles with, right? Like, is this any good kind of thing? And so I decided to start to lean in on that. And so I started writing a series of essays about fatherhood. And at this point, my oldest son, I had this experience with my oldest son, which made me reflect on some of my own early experiences as a kid. So when I was a kid, I remember, I'm hanging out with my next door neighbor, and he was about my age, maybe a year or two older, and we're helping his dad hang up the Christmas lights outside the house. And it was the big light bulbs, the kind that fade and pop. And we're holding the strands for his dad, and his dad is throwing out the broken and the faded ones, and he throws away a faded red bulb. And I said, "Oh, that sucks. Pink is my favorite color." And my friend and his dad, they both kind of chuckled, and his dad looks at me and he's like, "Pink's a girl's color." And I remember I was in the first grade maybe, and I remember thinking, "Oh, holy shit, there are rules, right? Like, there are rules to this thing." Like, I didn't have a dad. I didn't have any older brothers, right? It was just me and like my mom and two older sisters. And so I remember hearing that going, "Oh my God, like, I'm screwed. Who's going to teach me these rules?" Right. Um, and so that actually really influenced a lot of my like neuroses at that early age. When my son was, I don't know, he was probably 7 years old, roughly the same age. We're hanging out together and he's coloring, and I asked him, "Hey, Cruz, do you have a favorite color?" And he says, "Yeah, pink." And I remember thinking, what? Like, it was this weird echo, right, that came back like however many years later, 35 years later. And so it just got me to thinking about like, what are the things that I can recall, right, when I was his age? Like, what's all the bullshit I learned that I have to unlearn to kind of more effectively parent him? So I sat down and started writing like a collection of essays about this, right? Like, first time I got into a fist fight, right? Like, and I got my ass kicked. And so I'm not done, but that's what I've been working on for a while now. And it's like this collection of personal essays about that and about fatherhood and like fathering from the perspective of someone who never had one. So that creative endeavor really started right toward the tail end of my tenure as commissioner. And so when I resigned professionally, I was sort of like, what do I do now? Right. I was searching for what to do next. It's right around the time that I met my co-founder, Michael Cavallero, and we became fast friends. Immediately realized we both have a lot of experience in banking and fintech. We both have common interests in sports media entertainment. He starts talking to me about the creator economy and convinces me, helps me understand, hey, there is this real and growing demographic of solopreneurs and micro businesses that operate in very unique ways that are not currently being served by kind of traditional financial suites. And so we talked about the opportunity that there is to build to build a product, to build a company that serves that unique and growing demographic. And I got excited, about the prospect of building something that is mine. And frankly, I got excited about building something that aligns with, this ethos that I've ignored for so long, which is, my own creativity. So that's kind of how and then we came up with the name Manifest one day over a lot of like sake and sushi in the basement of some restaurant in San Francisco.
I want to talk a little bit about the writing some more, and especially as it relates to being a dad. What are you finding in the writing? And in a lot of ways, I feel like I wish I had started with this topic because I think there's a lot to unearth here. What are you getting from the writing process, especially as it relates to like essays that are personal rather than, fiction, for example? What itch is that scratching?
So I think it's a couple things. One is it's been, especially early days, it was very therapeutic, right? It was therapeutic to focus on an outlet that was so incredibly unrelated from my professional life. Um, uh, and then, you know, it's just it also just helped remind me how much I enjoy it. Like um, I derive a lot of joy out of just playing with words. It's just fun, right? And again, it's something that I think I had ignored for so long. Um, Look, if I'm honest, like when you and I were in school together, one of the classes I took was the personal essay, and I loved that class because I loved it for so many reasons, and I loved a lot of the I loved a lot of the assignments, the essays that I wrote then, and I loved everything about it. And I think over time I convinced myself that this is not serious work because
It was so fun.
it would because it was so, but also like who the hell cares about your personal essay,
Yeah.
right? Like I sort of convinced, and in a lot of ways, if I'm honest, it's kind of how I like defaulted to law school because I was like, I know I'm a writer and I feel like I need an outlet that is more serious, right, than just a personal essay. But when I came back to it again, it was therapeutic. I enjoyed it, and I was finally at a point in my life where I was like, um, who cares if nothing more ever comes of this? Like I feel like I've done enough professionally to give myself the latitude to like do this. This is like I actually really enjoy this, and so that's why like it brought me back around to other I don't know other writers and creators that I've really enjoyed. Right, like I love Anthony Bourdain. Right, the monologues that he wrote.
Totally.
So many of his episodes are like incredible. Like his books are so much fun to read. I love Dave Sedaris. Right,
Yeah.
like we were in college, right? The first time I read Me Talk Pretty one day, and it was like one of the first times that I laughed out loud in
I
a library.
remember. Yeah, I
Yeah.
remember this coming out.
Um, and it's funny because I recently on a long flight I recently watched one of his master classes, and he talks about this fear that I think I've always had, which is like it's hard, it's scary to sit down and just like face an empty page, like a blank page. But that's where the heavy work happens, right? And that's where the hard work happens. And your task, if you want to be serious about this, is to like encounter that every day.
When I hear this, and I'm going to couple it with something you said, and I'm offering this to you to reject or criticize, but when you talk about the pink color and then witnessing it in your son, I have something very similar in not that specific, but I have found myself thinking about traumatic events when I was much younger as I watch my 2.5-year-old wander around without any fears. And what I'm referring to is the shadow self, which is when you start to explore yourself and you start to reveal yourself further and further, the world has a way of informing you that that's no longer accepted. And if it's informing you in such an aggressive way, you start to develop some form of and I don't know if you grew up Catholic, but I did. You start to develop this guilt, this shame about this part of yourself. And you fast forward however many years in that, that starts to become closeted. And if you're not careful, it can become a monster it can become the bane of your existence, triggering certain responses to the world that aren't necessarily relevant anymore or related to that environment. And I'll give you a more specific example. So, um, you know, a door slamming in my family, that was a marker of how we fought. You'd slam the door. To this day, if a wind gust comes through the house and a door slams, I still get a shudder up my spine because I think somebody's pissed and they're coming after me. But that doesn't happen, right? Nobody's coming after me, but I still have that same response. But I'm landing the plane here. I'm wondering if you find any similarity as I have started to write similarly, not knowing whether if it's going to go anywhere. I have found an extraordinary catharsis where I've been able to go back and confront some of the shadow self and realize that there's this beautiful little kid that got frozen in time, and that part of himself never really got to reveal itself. And in that revelation, there is more of you than you thought, because it's been sheltered in some way or cast away. And I'm wondering, certainly any objection or criticism to that theory, but have you found more of yourself being revealed that not necessarily you'd be surprised by, but that's comforting to witness on the page? Meaning that's a part of myself I miss, and I sort of love getting to see that person again.
That does resonate with me. And it actually makes me think of something, I was something related to, when you and I were in school together. I do feel like the process of writing has helped me, the personas that we developed, that I developed as a professional, they tend to be harder edged, right? Like you need resiliency. And so you develop this really kind of thick skin, right? And I think that's not naturally me, right? Like that's not naturally who I am. And I think the process of, raising my sons and then also like exploring that through writing has helped remind me that like, dude, that's not you, or like there is more to you than that, right? Like there's a softer side, and it's okay, right? Like, don't, there's this idea of like masculinity, or like what it means to be a good man, right? Right. And it's like, I think for too long, I had convinced myself of what that meant. Right. And in a lot of ways, like, being a good man can be incompatible with this idea of like, exploring what lurks beneath the surface, right? The emotional part, et cetera, et cetera. And I think it's really too bad. And I think it's unnatural. And here's why I say this. So I was at my mom's house, this is now a couple months ago, and I was going through some old stuff that I had there. And I had this old like Peanuts lunchbox tin where I kept a bunch of like just random mementos, mostly from college. And what I found were, there were a handful of like postcards and letters that the early crew, right, like the Brian Bosses of the world, that we had written to each other during summer breaks. And I reread through some of these postcards, and I was like, damn, like, one, we were so young, right? But two, and there was this naivete and optimism and all of that, right? Like coming through in the postcards that we wrote to each other. And I'm like, it was like, they were very sweet. And I was like, at some point, right? Like we sort of lost that as a collective, right? Like we lost that for whatever reason. And so I think that's that's one thing I'm like, I am coming around to, I'm accepting, which is like, maybe the natural state of things is that like, we should feel more comfortable, right? Like, embracing our sons when they say like, hey, pink is my favorite color. Like it's a fucking awesome color, right? It's like the color of like cotton candy and, like sunsets. And so that for me has been like a big part of the writing project, right? So what I like in my mind, what I've called this project is macho cheese, right? Because it's like, what's all like what are all the stupid macho components I gotta let go of.
I love macho cheese. Let's bring this into a close. One penultimate question. As it relates to masculinity and being a dad, how are you creating that? How do you envision that? How are you exhibiting and maybe informing your sons about that definition that you've effectively had to create? I mean, what's your take on dad and masculinity without necessarily a role model that you had reliably to call upon?
So I don't know that I have a conclusion, to be honest. I don't know that I have a great conclusion. I think the belief that I'm proceeding from right now is that maybe it's a false premise to begin with. Maybe this idea of like masculinity is just like so utterly false to begin with. Like what does that have to do with anything? What does that have to do with being a good father? What does that have to do with being a good son? What does that have to do with like being a caring person and like, feeling comfortable kind of conveying and receiving that. And that's kind of where I am, right? Like, I think it was a bill of goods that was sold to me.
Yeah. And I think a bunch of other boys in the 80s, potentially even in the 90s. But Manny, this has been a real joy. Any final closing thoughts or things you think I may have missed that you'd want to address?
No, man. I love I love the project. I love that you're doing this. It's actually I'm sincere when I say I think I'm going to steal from your process, because coming back to Anthony Bourdain, I've always joked about doing something similar where like I want to interview executives without introducing them, but like what I really want to know is like, what's the best meal you've ever had while traveling for business, or like tell me about a wacky, like I'm more interested in like the absurd travel experiences associated with business than I am the business itself. And so I've been thinking about that concept and, calling it Chasing Tony or whatever. But no, look, I love that you're doing this. I love that you're, like that you are also exploring more of your creativity. I think it's just healthy and, I hope it inspires, I'm sure it'll continue to inspire more people to do the same. And, in that regard, if you're interested, if you're a creator, you're interested in the creator space, I encourage you all to check out manifestfinancial.com to learn more about the practical, the practical financial tools that we've built there to kind of help those people on their journey.
We'll be sure to include that in the show notes. And any place you'd want people to reach out to you, and sort of, if at all, what type of people would you want to hear from? Investors, potential guests.
Yeah, no, that's a good point. We are kind of in the final strokes of our seed round at Manifest. So if any potential seed investors are out there and would love to learn more, there's probably a little more capacity that we have to round out. But other than that, I trust that the universe will connect me with whoever it is I need to be connected to.
I love it. All right. Thank you, brother.
Yeah, love it. Thanks so much, man.
Thanks for listening. For a detailed list of episodes and show notes, visit scalesofsuccesspodcast.com. If you found this conversation engaging, consider signing up for our newsletter, where we go even deeper on a weekly basis, sharing exclusive insights and actionable strategies that can help you in your own journey. We'd also appreciate if you subscribed, rated, or shared today's episode. It helps us to attract more illuminating guests, adding to the list of enlightening conversations we've had with New York Times bestsellers, producers, founders, CEOs, congressmen, and other independent thinkers who are challenging the status quo. You can also follow us for updates, extra content, and more insights from our guests. We hope to have you back again next week for another episode of Scales of Success. Scales of Success is an Edge West Capital production.